December 2015. Investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howie's inbox blinks. An email from Brian, a U.S. Navy flight engineer with an Antarctic service medal, detonates. They told us it was an air sampling station. They lied.
Antarctica, the coldest and most isolated continent on Earth, is often portrayed as a realm of peace and science. Yet behind the blank white maps and the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 lies a reality more unsettling than any military secret. Brian, a flight engineer with the United States Navy who spent decades operating C-130 aircraft over the frozen skies, chose to break the silence and reveal what he describes as the full truth. The truth he speaks of is not a hidden weapon or an illegal military base. It is a warning about humanity's true position in the order of power, and about a silent covenant that every dominant nation on Earth has been compelled to accept: the White Treaty and the promise of a peaceful planet. Antarctica has long lived in the public imagination as the ultimate symbol of human unity, a vast and pristine continent untouched by political borders. Since 1959, the Antarctic Treaty has established a legal framework unlike anything the world had ever seen. 12 nations at the outset, including rival superpowers such as the United States and the Soviet Union at the height of their confrontation, agreed to transform an entire continent into a demilitarized zone. It was hailed as the greatest achievement of modern diplomacy, a pledge that science would guide the future of humanity rather than guns or territorial ambition. Colossal research stations such as the American base at McMurdo or the Russian station at Vostok operate like fortresses of knowledge in the heart of the frozen desert. Thousands of scientists work tirelessly to measure atmospheric composition, drill deep into ice cores that preserve millions of years of climate history, and study extreme ecosystems that may resemble conditions on other worlds. Transparency appears to reign supreme. All collected data is shared openly. Every expedition is monitored by the international community. News reports from Antarctica carry a reassuring message. This is a land of wisdom, overseen by the brightest minds for the benefit of the entire planet. The logistical system supporting this noble mission is itself remarkably sophisticated. Heavy transport aircraft such as the C-130 Hercules, fitted with ski landing gear, serve as the only lifeline connecting the modern world to the most remote research outposts. Flight crews like Brian and his colleagues are trained to operate in the harshest conditions imaginable, where temperatures can plunge below -50 degrees Celsius and violent storms can erase every trace of human presence within minutes. Their task is to deliver milk, food, fuel, and scientific equipment, the most ordinary supplies in the most extraordinary setting. The military presence is explained simply as logistical support for massive civilian projects that no private organization could sustain alone. Yet this sense of reassurance begins to fracture when one looks closer at the enormous operating costs and the level of secrecy surrounding certain activities. Although Antarctica is officially demilitarized, radio communication protocols and airspace surveillance are enforced with an intensity that seems abnormal, even surpassing that of strategic air bases within the continental United States. Every flight must follow rigidly defined corridors, and even the slightest deviation triggers an immediate and severe response from air traffic control centers. Peace here is maintained through iron rules, where the freedom to explore appears to exist only on the surface of legal documents. This contradiction becomes sharper when scientists, the supposed primary stewards of the continent, find themselves confined to narrowly defined work zones, air sampling stations, which appear to house only routine measuring equipment, are surrounded by permanent and inviolable restricted airspace. The official explanation is to prevent aircraft emissions from contaminating atmospheric readings. Yet the sheer scale of these restricted zones is difficult to reconcile with a purely scientific purpose. The presence of an absolute boundary at the heart of a continent said to belong to all humanity raises unsettling questions about what is truly being protected beneath the ancient ice. The restricted zone, at the heart of an open continent. Doubts about the true nature of Antarctic operations began to crystallize through the direct experience of Brian, a seasoned flight engineer with thousands of hours aboard LC-130 aircraft, the ski-equipped variant of the legendary Hercules. In Brian's world, Antarctica was not a realm of freedom, but a maze of regulations and invisible borders that existed not in the landscape itself, but on radar screens and flight charts. His daily responsibility was to keep the turboprop engines running smoothly in biting cold, while the crew guided the massive aircraft through narrow corridors of permitted airspace. At the center of these journeys lay a singular anomaly. A fixed no-fly zone sat near an atmospheric sampling station roughly 5 miles from the South Pole. Every pilot assigned to Operation Deep Freeze was thoroughly briefed on this area. Radio protocol there was enforced to an extreme degree. If an aircraft strayed even a few hundred meters from its assigned path, control centers issued immediate warnings in a tone that suggested readiness for interception. Despite the fact that no fighter aircraft were officially allowed to operate over Antarctica, the contradiction was stark. Why would a civilian atmospheric research site require a level of protection comparable to a nuclear weapons testing ground? In the bars at McMurdo and during closed-door briefings before flights, whispered stories began to circulate about medical evacuation missions. Crews reported requesting permission to fly directly through the restricted zone to save critical time when evacuating severely injured personnel from distant camps such as Davis. These requests were invariably denied without hesitation. Control centers would rather accept the risk of death along a longer detour than allow anyone to glimpse what lay beneath that so-called air sampling station. The rules here did not appear to serve human life. They served another priority altogether, one that outweighed the value of survival itself. The contradictions deepened further when standard navigation systems, including inertial guidance and terrain radar, began to register unexplained interference as aircraft approached the boundaries of restricted areas. Veteran pilots spoke of an eerie radio silence, where communication frequencies were artificially severed, creating an information void in one of the most heavily monitored regions on Earth. Official reports blamed auroral activity, or geomagnetic storms. Brian and his colleagues knew better. The disruptions followed patterns that were too consistent and too geographically precise to be natural phenomena. An apparatus of absolute control had been erected inside a region officially defined as demilitarized. Scientific infrastructure functioned as a facade for a genuine military boundary, one so secretive that even personnel serving the United States government were denied any knowledge of what they were guarding. The presence of these uncompromising rules points to a troubling reality. Something in Antarctica demands the absolute silence of humanity and the world's governments. Rather than acting as stewards, appear to be behaving like sentinels who fear punishment should the secret of the true owner ever be revealed. The rescue mission and the silence of consensus. The search for answers to these anomalies reached a breaking point during an unforeseen emergency, when Brian's crew received orders to carry out a medical evacuation flight to Davis Camp. This was no routine mission. Crushing time pressure and brutal weather forced the crew into a decision that would reshape everything they thought they understood. As the LC-130 climbed to clear the towering transantarctic mountains, they faced not only blinding snowstorms, but a terrifying absence of guidance from standard navigation channels. Every modern instrument seemed to fail before an invisible energy barrier that blanketed the Antarctic interior. The epicenter of this unease lay in Marie Byrd Land, a region so vast and desolate that even the most daring expeditions rarely ventured there. In this remote expanse, a team of 15 senior scientists from the National Science Foundation vanished without warning, losing all contact for 2 full weeks. Such an event was unthinkable in the satellite age, where every research station is expected to report its status hourly. When Brian and his crew were dispatched for initial access, they found no evidence of an attack or accident. The camp remained intact. Expensive equipment continued to run autonomously. Half-finished cups of coffee still sat on tables, yet not a single human being remained. Approaching Marie Byrd Land unfolded under extreme tension. Long-range observation systems and onboard sensors began registering rhythmic interference signals unlike any known military or civilian frequency. These signals appeared to originate from deep beneath the ice, generating a data shadow that enveloped the entire research camp. What began as a standard rescue operation quickly became an incursion into an undefined zone where the rules of physics and human logistics seemed to bend. The disappearance of 15 people without a single distress signal suggested not an accident, but a deliberate retrieval. When the crew finally recovered the scientists after their sudden reappearance, reality grew even more disturbing. The 15 individuals returned in a state Brian described as hollow. They were not shivering from the cold. They were not panicked by isolation. Instead, they were neurologically inert, eyes wide open, yet fixed on nothing, as if the operating system of their minds had been overwritten or erased. There were no explanations and no cries for help. They sat in absolute silence. Their presence aboard the aircraft felt less like that of rescued colleagues and more like unfamiliar objects. All equipment, documents, and samples belonging to the scientific team were immediately placed under complete control of the United States military. Nothing was transferred to civilian laboratories as protocol demanded. Instead, the materials were sealed inside Quonset-style storage buildings and guarded by security units never before seen at McMurdo. A collective silence settled over the incident. No official report was released. Anyone involved in the rescue understood that the disappearance of the 15 scientists was not a matter of biological safety or national security. It was evidence that humanity had encountered an entity capable of altering the very nature of human consciousness, the structure that cannot exist. The assumption that the restricted zone concealed nothing more than a modest atmospheric research station collapsed when Brian's crew was forced to fly directly through the forbidden area to shorten a medical evacuation route. Beneath the Antarctic sun, reflecting off endless white ice, a sight emerged that defied all known principles of architecture and logistics. Instead of a handful of Quonset huts and slender sensor towers, a colossal subterranean complex opened within the ancient ice. Its entrance was so immense that Brian estimated a full C-130 transport aircraft, with a wingspan exceeding 40 meters, could fly straight inside without difficulty. This structure was not the result of natural geological processes or an eroded ice cavern. Its geometry was exact, marked by precise 45-degree angles plunging into the earth like a gigantic mechanical incision. The interior surfaces were smooth and reflective, resembling metal or a composite material never manufactured by humans at such scale in the most remote place on Earth. Tracks from heavy snow vehicles and well-established transport routes led directly into the shaft, revealing a large-scale industrial operation functioning continuously beneath the gaze of the international scientific community. The existence of such a massive artificial structure delivered a shock that overturned every accepted understanding of the global order. Under the Antarctic Treaty, all construction projects must be declared and tightly monitored to ensure minimal environmental impact. Building an installation the size of a football field, buried hundreds of meters beneath ice, would require staggering logistical resources, tens of thousands of supply flights, and a workforce far too large to conceal under the label of atmospheric research. Yet no records of transporting construction materials for such a facility appeared in the maritime or aviation logs of McMurdo. Viewed from above, the opening resembled a gateway to another world, a hidden command center where human activity represented only a thin surface layer. The technical details Brian observed, from the subdued artificial lighting deep within the shaft to the organization of supply routes, pointed to a level of engineering and an energy source independent of conventional diesel generators. This was not a temporary American or Russian base. It was a permanent installation, built to endure for millennia, existing beyond the control and comprehension of any government on Earth. This cognitive shock led to an unavoidable question: who truly owned this structure? If no nation on Earth possessed the ability to build and operate it in secrecy within a forbidden zone, then it must belong to an entity that was present long before humans began drawing borders on maps. The colossal shaft was not merely a military secret. It was a physical testament that our entire history of Antarctic exploration had been a staged performance, one in which humanity was allowed to play on the surface while the true custodians operated the planet from deep within the ice. The submission of the stewards. When all the fragments are assembled, from inviolable restricted airspace to the colossal structure beneath the ice, a new reality takes shape, one that completely reverses humanity's position within the global hierarchy of power. Antarctica is not an unclaimed land devoted to science. As we have long comforted ourselves into believing, it is a territory that already has an owner. Human governments did not sign treaties with one another in pursuit of peaceful coexistence here. In truth, they collectively signed an act of submission to the entity that controls the immense shaft beneath the ice. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 was not an environmental safeguard. It was a covenant of stewardship, an agreement in which the great powers pledged to ensure that the human population would never approach or learn of the presence of the owner. The incident involving the 15 scientists who vanished and returned in a hollow state stands as proof of the cost of crossing the boundary. These individuals were not victims of an accident. They were samples that had been retrieved and processed after inadvertently witnessing something beyond the authority of a caretaker. Their mental paralysis, resembling a system wiped clean and reset, suggests a technology capable of acting directly upon consciousness. It represents an absolute form of deterrence, ensuring that any leaked secret could never be coherently transmitted. The disturbing public message posted by Buzz Aldrin in 2016 about an evil presence in Antarctica was not the rambling of an elderly man. It was a rare fracture in the wall of censorship, a moment when terror briefly surfaced in response to a superior force beyond human resistance. Within this order, institutions such as the NSA and elite military units from the United States, Russia, and China function as contracted security personnel, maintaining stability on behalf of the true owner. They are not protecting American national secrets. They are enforcing the safety of the restricted zones in exchange for continued existence and for the technological or material remnants granted from beneath the ice. All geopolitical conflicts across other continents, from the Cold War to modern warfare, cease at the Antarctic boundary. This is the only place on Earth where absolute peace exists, because here, the most powerful rulers of humanity share a single fear: the fear that the agreement could be terminated and that they would be erased by the entity they serve. The facade of scientific transparency is merely a tool used by the stewards to legitimize their military and financial presence in Antarctica. Atmospheric research stations are in reality surveillance outposts, where scientists receive only data that has been filtered through layers of military control. Humanity's presence on the continent resembles ants allowed to crawl across a giant's table, permitted only so long as we do not disturb or attempt to look inside the drawer. Reports of unidentified flying objects or anomalous structures are erased through a sophisticated mechanism of suppression, not to protect the public from panic, but to conceal the weakness of governments before the true owner of the planet. This submission is existential in nature. If the most powerful nations on Earth are willing to set aside all conflict in order to protect a single secret on a distant continent, then that secret must hold the key to humanity's survival. The boundary of invisible power. The covert control centered in Antarctica does not end at the geographic edges of the frozen continent. It has evolved into a global surveillance system whose power overwhelms any conventional notion of privacy or national sovereignty. When Brian attempted to share his experiences with journalist Linda Moulton Howe, he immediately encountered the reach of this invisible force. A call from the NSA rang directly on his personal phone, accurately describing the contents of a conversation he had just held in a deserted parking lot at midnight, with no recording devices and no other people present. This was not routine intelligence monitoring. It was a demonstration of the ability to track human thought and action at the moment of their formation. This power manifests physically in Antarctic skies through the appearance of silver disc-shaped craft over the transantarctic mountains. Brian described these objects not as random, unidentified phenomena, but as active and calculated herders of C-130 transport aircraft. They did not attack. Instead, they asserted absolute control of the airspace by executing 90-degree turns at supersonic speed and halting instantly in midair, maneuvers that would liquefy the lungs of any human pilot. These silver discs functioned as the space police of Antarctica's owner, reminding human crews that they were permitted to fly only as supervised guests. The response of the global political system to these phenomena was a synchronized and unsettling silence. Major news agencies, international intelligence services, and even leading scientific institutions followed a shared protocol of denial and witness isolation. Brian's interrogation by men in tailored suits, without any written confidentiality agreement, was not an oversight. It was a deliberate erasure technique. The absence of paperwork conveyed a clear message. This truth was too large to be governed by human law. Verbal threats and invisible monitoring created a psychological prison for anyone who dared to touch the veil. This surveillance system reveals a grim reality. The entire telecommunications and information infrastructure of the modern world appears to have been designed with concealed access points reserved for the Antarctic entity. The NSA's ability to instantly access a private conversation in open space implies a level of data acquisition far beyond conventional radio waves or satellites. We seem to live within an information ecosystem where every unit of data is filtered through a supreme authority. Any signal that threatens to destabilize the global pact of silence is intercepted immediately through direct intervention in the personal lives of witnesses. The overwhelming dominance of this invisible force renders resistance by individuals or small groups futile. Antarctica is not protected merely by miles of ice. It is encased within a boundary of energy and data power that humanity cannot yet comprehend. C-130 aircraft continue to fly. Research stations continue to collect measurements. Yet all of it exists within a vast cage of surveillance. This boundary does not lie in markers planted in the snow. It exists within the phone in our hands, within aircraft radar systems, and within the consciousness of those who govern the world. Individuals who understand better than anyone that they serve a master who tolerates no mistakes in the preservation of secrecy. The Covenant beneath the ancient ice. The answer to the question of Antarctica's true owner likely lies not in any legal document accessible to us, but in the unconditional obedience displayed by every major power on Earth. When we look into the colossal shaft, we do not see a military base. We may be looking at the true command center of the planet itself. The hypothesis of stewardship by a superior entity reframes modern history entirely. Under this view, Antarctica is not a newly discovered wilderness. It is the territory of a presence that existed long before human civilization began. The international treaties we celebrate may be little more than leasing agreements, granting humanity permission to inhabit other continents in exchange for guarding and concealing the owner's presence at the South Pole. If this hypothesis holds, then the civilized world beyond Antarctica is merely a collection of outer districts, granted temporary autonomy so long as the stewards, meaning governments, succeed in keeping the population from crossing the white boundary. Brian's C-130 aircraft continue to fly. Restricted zones remain enforced by radar and intimidation. The silence of the hollowed scientists stands as the price paid when an individual glimpses the true nature of the system. Antarctica, with its deep shaft and patrolling silver disks, functions as a colossal watchtower from which a superior entity observes our development. The strange peace of the continent is not evidence of human wisdom. It is the quiet breathing of an ancient presence, maintaining an order beyond negotiation. Brian's story ends with a broken oath of silence, but its aftershocks leave a deeper philosophical unease. We may continue to see headlines about ice core research or the melting of glaciers, yet behind those familiar narratives, an eternal secret continues to seep through the cracks of routine. Antarctica's silence is not serenity. It is anticipation. How long will the covenant beneath the ancient ice endure? And what happens if humanity one day can no longer serve as obedient stewards? The answer may lie beneath the precise 45-degree angles of the immense shaft, where the truth of humanity's place remains frozen, waiting for a moment of thaw that none of us are truly prepared to face.